Easter Island's Moai, the multi-ton statues, some measuring more than 20 meters in length and weighing more than 75 tons, were carved out of the island's quarry of volcanic tuff and then transported over the island's rugged terrain.
Easter Island, and you look at the sites there, the statues, the megalithic walls, you realize they're much older than what, history tells us.
Imagine a tiny island in the middle of the ocean, thousands of kilometers away from the rest of the world. And on this lonely place stand around 900 huge stone statues. For centuries, we have believed that these were simply religious monuments. But what if that is not completely true? Many of these statues are around 13 feet tall and weigh 14 tons. One statue was as tall as 33 feet, while another unfinished statue, if completed, would have been 72 feet tall and weighed around 270 tons. But the real mystery is not their size. The mystery is their calculation. Some stone platforms appear to have been built in extremely precise locations according to special events in the sky. Some statues seem to face towards distant parts of the ocean. Then there are the red stone Pukau hats, echoing roads, and the still mysterious Rongo-Rongo script. And the most surprising thing? Over time, the accuracy of these constructions seems to have decreased. So, have we misunderstood these statues for 300 years? Did the people of Rapanui hide not only their beliefs in these stones, but also their knowledge? Stay with this video until the end, because the connections we are about to discover may force us to look at the whole story of Easter Island from a completely different point of view. But to understand this story, we have to start from the place where the world seems to come to an end. Before we move ahead in the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can watch such videos first. In the middle of the South Pacific Ocean, there is a small island, Rapanui, which we know today as Easter Island. This place is so far away that for thousands of kilometers around it, all you can see is ocean. It is around 2,300 miles away from the nearest continent. That means even today, reaching this place is not an easy journey. But between around 700 and 1200 AD, the people of Rapanui reached this extremely distant place. Imagine, at that time they had no GPS, no compass, and no modern metal tools. What they had was their experience and their ability to understand nature. They watched the movement of stars in the night sky. They observed which direction the ocean waves were coming from, how the wind was changing, and what the behavior of waves rising on the surface of the ocean was telling them. All of these things were read as signs. Even the behavior of birds seen over the ocean could have been a clue showing them the way. And the most important thing is that this knowledge was not written down in a book. It was remembered and passed down from one generation to the next. Fathers told their children, and the children taught the next generation. In this way, the knowledge of crossing thousands of miles of open ocean continued through human memory. But now the most interesting part of the story begins. Because the real question is not how they managed to reach this distant island. The real question is what they did first after reaching this lonely island. They did not build a large harbor, they did not build big city roads, and they did not build a palace. They started cutting huge stones, and from those same stones, they created the mysterious statues that we know today as Moai. But why was there such a need to build these statues? That is the question that takes us to the next, and much more mysterious, part of this story. When the people of Rapanui reached this island, they started building something that is still difficult to imagine today. They began cutting the rocks of a large volcanic crater, Rongo-Rongo, and started creating huge stone statues. Today, around 900 Moai statues have been recorded across the island. On average, one Moai was around 13 feet tall and weighed about 14 tons. But some statues were much bigger than this. The largest statue that was successfully raised was around 33 feet tall. And then comes one statue that gives us an idea of just how large-scale this work was. An unfinished statue is still present in the rock of Rongo-Rongo. If it had been completed, it would have been around 72 feet tall and weighed about 270 tons. Some of these moai were placed on huge stone platforms called ahu. Some fell down over time, and some were left unfinished right inside the quarry, almost as if someone had suddenly stopped the work. For centuries, the most common way of understanding these statues was that they were religious monuments built in memory of ancestors. It was believed that chiefs had such statues made to show their ancestry, family status, and power. This sounds completely reasonable. But this is where a question comes up. If these were only monuments for ancestors, then why do we see so much precision in where they were built, which direction they faced, and how they were constructed? Was the purpose of these stone giants only to impress people, or was there some kind of information hidden behind them that we have simply not noticed until now? And this question takes us to the next biggest mystery, the connection between these statues and the sky. Until now, we were looking at the moai as nothing more than huge stone statues. But when researchers started looking carefully at the ahu platforms built around them, the story began to change a little. The exact GPS coordinates of each ahu were recorded. Then researchers looked at which direction it was built in and what its angle was. At first, it may seem that there would naturally be some small mistakes in such old constructions. But when all these numbers were put together, an interesting pattern appeared. These platforms were not built randomly everywhere. The direction of some ahu appears to have a connection with special events that happen in the sky. These include the spring equinox, meaning the time when day and night are almost equal, the winter solstice, when the sun reaches its special seasonal position, and zenith passage, meaning the 2 times each year, when, at this latitude, the sun appears almost directly overhead. But the real surprise comes here. Among these astronomically aligned platforms, the average angular error has been reported to be around 0.4 degrees. Now, 0.4 degrees may sound like a very small difference, but just think about it. Hundreds of years ago, without modern surveying equipment, how could the direction of a platform made from such huge stones have been determined so precisely? It does not seem like someone simply pointed the stones toward the sun by guessing. At the very least, it raises the question of whether these people already knew where the sun would appear on certain days of the year. And if that was the case, it means these people had a deep understanding of watching the sky and understanding its patterns. But now the story becomes even more interesting, because if the ahu were somehow recording information about the sky, then another question comes up. What were the moai themselves recording? Was the direction of their faces also pointing towards some kind of special information? And that question takes us to the next mystery of the island. Now the question was not only whether the ahu platforms were pointing toward the sky. Researchers noticed one more thing. What direction were the moai actually looking in? The orientation of each statue was studied. Then the direction of its face was extended forward as a straight imaginary line all the way to the ocean horizon. In simple language, you can think of this as a sight line, and this is where something interesting appeared. If these directions were just a coincidence, then these lines would be scattered in different places. But in some cases, that was not happening. Several sight lines appeared to point toward specific points along the ocean around the island. Around 11 such convergence points were identified. After that, these directions were compared with Polynesian navigation routes. Claims were made that bearings connected to the directions of Hawaii, Marquesas Islands, Society Islands, and New Zealand could be seen. Now, it is important to understand how Polynesian sailors found their way across the ocean. They did not have GPS or a navigation screen like we do today. At night, they watched the stars. They understood the direction from which ocean waves and swells were coming. They watched the direction of the wind, and sometimes they could even estimate the direction of land by observing the behavior of birds flying over the ocean. For them, the ocean was not just empty water. There were routes hidden within it. And if the directions of the Moai were really connected to these navigation bearings, then the way we look at these statues completely changes. If this interpretation is correct, then the Moai were not only statues standing in memory of their ancestors. They could also have been markers encoding the directions of the vast ocean, which connected the entire ancestral world of the people of Rapanui. But now another question comes up. If there was really some information hidden in these statues, then what was the purpose of those red stones placed on their heads? Were they just decoration? Or was there some kind of signal hidden inside them too? Now we come to those red stones placed on the heads of the Moai, which are called Pukau. At first glance, they simply look like large red hats. They were made from a different type of volcanic rock than the Moai and were brought from a separate place called Pukau. The most interesting thing is that not every Moai has a Pukau. These red stones appear only on some of the statues. So the question is, why? For a long time, there was a simple answer to this. It was believed that Pukau represented status, power, and prestige. In other words, if a chief had more power or higher status, a large red hat like this would be placed on his statue. But when the weight and structure of these statues were looked at in different ways, another possibility appeared. In AI analysis, the weight distribution and center of gravity of Moai with Pukau and those without Pukau were compared. After that, the discussion reached the subject of vibration. When a stone structure is hit or experiences vibration, it vibrates in a particular way. This can be understood through its resonant frequency. Placing a Pukau on top changes the weight and balance of the Moai, so its vibration pattern can also change. And when this information was compared with the navigation lines mentioned earlier, another pattern was claimed to appear. Some statues pointing toward distant destinations appear to have Pukau more often, while statues connected to nearby places often do not have Pukau. If this connection is proven to be correct, then Pukau were not just decoration. It is possible that different vibration patterns were connected in some way to distance or navigation information. Keep in mind, this is still a hypothesis, not a proven final fact. But if stones could give information, then did the people of Rapanui also build paths to hear that information? Now the story takes us to those mysterious stone roads. So far, we have come across many questions connected to the Ahu, Moai, and Pukau. But on Easter Island, there are also some stone roads that add another strange connection to this whole story. It is generally believed that these roads were built from the Rongo-Rongo quarry to the coast, so that the huge Moai could be moved from one place to another. This sounds completely reasonable. But then a problem comes up. Many of these roads are so narrow that moving even the widest Moai statues along them seems not just difficult, but almost impossible. If the road is not even wider than the base of the statue, then what exactly were these roads built for? This is where another possibility comes up. The width of these roads fits better with people walking on them. In some places, people could have walked like a procession, while some sections are so narrow that people would have had to move forward almost in a single line. And then comes the stone used in these roads. When footsteps hit a surface made from volcanic rock, or someone strikes a stone, it creates sound. If people walked in a rhythm, their footsteps hit the ground, or drums were played, these vibrations could spread through the surface of the road. In some places, the effect of this sound and echo may have been felt more strongly. These could be understood as acoustic nodes. So the road was not only taking you somewhere, perhaps it was taking you through a particular experience. Now look at the whole picture. Astronomy to Ahu navigation to Moai distance/frequency to Pukau sound and experience to roads. If all these connections are pointing in the right direction, then this is no longer just a group of statues. It begins to look like a complete information system. But the biggest weakness of any sophisticated system is this. What if one day the people who were supposed to read it forgot what it meant? And this question leads us to the next part of the mystery, a mysterious script that still cannot be completely read today, Rongo-Rongo. Now the story reaches something that makes it seem as if the people of Rapanui also tried to write down and leave behind some part of their knowledge. It is called Rongo-Rongo. It is a system of mysterious marks and symbols made on wooden tablets. Until today, no one has been able to completely read it. It is counted among the possible writing systems that developed independently in the world, and around 26 known inscriptions have been studied. But in 2025, a researcher named Archaeology claimed that he had found a way to decode Rongo-Rongo. According to him, it could be a syllabic system in which things like Polynesian mythology, navigation, and ritual knowledge were recorded. But here, one thing needs to be clearly understood. This is still not a widely accepted academic consensus. There have been several decoding claims about Rongo-Rongo before, so for now, this interpretation should only be seen as a proposed explanation. Now the interesting thing is that the hypothesis in front of you does not stop here. According to the claim, when the Rongo-Rongo symbols were compared with the coordinates of Ahu platforms, astronomical measurements, navigation data, and acoustic information, some groups of symbols appeared to be connected with specific locations. Some patterns were connected to platforms that were said to be aligned with astronomical events, like the equinox, while some symbols were considered possibly connected to navigation-oriented locations. If this interpretation is proven to be correct, then it may not be enough to think of these wooden tablets as things used only to write stories or religious information. It is possible that they were a written record used to understand the information that was already present in the stones. In other words, the Moai and Ahu held physical information on one side, and Rongo-Rongo could have been its written record. But now the biggest question of the story comes forward. If the people of Rapa Nui had built such a sophisticated system, then why did a time come when this knowledge slowly began to disappear? This is where the most mysterious part of the story begins. Until now, the story was showing us a society that was trying to understand stones, the sky, the ocean, and sound together. But when statues built at different times and their alignments were studied, another troubling pattern appeared. In some of the early Moai and Ahu structures, the alignment appears to be quite accurate. This means the people who built them knew in which direction and at what place a stone needed to be positioned. But as time passed, this accuracy became weaker. In the earliest structures, the alignment error was said to be less than 0.3 degrees, while in the final period of construction, this same error increased to around 2.8 degrees. Now, the difference between 0.3 and 2.8 may sound small, but in reality, it is around 9 times more error. And this is where an interesting question comes up. Were later generations simply repeating the old tradition without completely understanding the real reason behind it? Think of it this way. The first generation may have said, "We know why this stone needs to be here," but after a few generations, the message may have changed into something as simple as, "We only remember that the stone should be somewhere around here." In other words, the information had not completely disappeared, but the technical understanding behind it slowly became weaker. There is a very strange piece of evidence of this that can still be seen in the Rano-Raraku quarry. There, a huge moai is still lying unfinished in the rock wall. Work had been started on carving it, but it was never completed. It is almost as if the work suddenly stopped at some point and the statue was left there. But the question is, does this mean that the entire civilization suddenly disappeared, or was there another reason behind it? And perhaps the answer was going to come not from the stones, but from the island's soil and old records of rainfall. For a long time, the story of Easter Island was told in a very simple way. It was said that the people of Rapa Nui overused their resources, cut down trees, damaged the environment, and eventually destroyed their own civilization. This story is often called the ecocide story, but now some new research is challenging this picture. In 2025, a study published in Communications Earth and Environment by researchers from the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory used sediment cores to understand the island's ancient environment. By looking at the wax from ancient plant leaves found in these layers of sediment and their hydrogen isotope signals, they created a rainfall record covering around 800 years, and the picture that appeared was quite different. Around 1550, a serious drought began, which may have continued for more than a century. Rainfall decreased, and on an island like this, the shortage of water became an even bigger problem, where freshwater sources were already limited. During this period, the pace of construction of some Ahu platforms also decreased, and changes began to appear in society. Around this same period, a new leadership system called Tangata Manu appears to have emerged. In this system, leadership was not based only on family ancestry connected to the Moai, but processes like athletic competition also became important. But the most important thing was that the research did not find strong evidence of the huge population collapse that would be expected from the classic ecocide story. This means it is possible that the people of Rapanui did not destroy their own environment and disappear. They faced a long climate crisis, changed their social rules, and adapted themselves according to the conditions. The major destruction came later, with slave raids, European contact, and diseases brought from outside. So perhaps the real story was not about destruction, but about surviving through changing conditions. But now the question was, how did that society preserve its knowledge in so many different places? The answer was going to come from a new 3D scan of Rongo-Rongo. Until now, we might think that to create such a large number of Moai, there must have been some kind of large centralized system on Rapanui. Perhaps a king, some special officials, or a system controlling the entire work from one place. But 3D scanning research that came out in November 2025 gives us a chance to look at this picture in a slightly different way. Carl Lipo from Binghamton University and his team created a high-resolution 3D model of the Rongo-Rongo quarry. Instead of looking at the quarry only from the ground, its entire structure could be studied in much greater detail. This analysis claimed that the quarry appeared to be divided into at least 30 different carving zones. In other words, it does not look like the entire quarry was operating like one large factory. Different groups worked in different areas. They may have had their own methods, their own traditions, and their own different techniques for carving and finishing the statues. Small but measurable differences in the size and style of the statues made by these different working groups can also be seen. And this point is very important for our story, because it could mean that Rapanui's technical knowledge was not kept by one king, priest, or central institution. This knowledge was spread across many different groups. You can understand it as a distributed knowledge network. But when the long drought put pressure on the island's resources and social system, this network also began to weaken slowly. Some groups separated, old traditions broke down, and specialist knowledge became weaker. Perhaps this is why later generations could still remember the old traditions, but could not repeat them with the same accuracy as before. In other words, people may have continued to remember what to do, but slowly they forgot exactly how to do it. And now, when all these clues are placed together, the entire story of Easter Island becomes much more mysterious than before. Until now, we have looked at the story of Easter Island in different parts, but if we put all these clues together, the picture becomes much more interesting. First, there are the Ahu platforms, some of whose directions appear to have a connection with special events in the sky. Then, there are the Moai, whose sightlines have been connected to certain points in the ocean and possible navigation routes. After that come the Pukau. If the possibility connected to their vibration and resonant frequency is proven to be correct, then they may not have been just decorative stones, but another layer of an information system. Then come the stone roads. If the hypothesis about their acoustic properties is correct, then the roads were not only meant to take people from one place to another, but may also have been part of a special sound experience. And then there is Rongo-Rongo, a mysterious written system that has still not been completely read. If the proposed interpretations connected to it are ever proven, it could also have been the written record of that physical system. Now remember the Rano-Raraku quarry. At least 30 different carving zones could mean that this knowledge was not kept in one place, but was spread across many specialist groups. Then came the long drought. The climate problem that began around 1550 changed this social network, and technical knowledge slowly became weaker. So, was Rapanui a kind of library? This is not a proven fact. It is better to understand it as an interpretation. Because wood can decay, oral memory can disappear, but stone can survive for centuries. Its direction can still be measured today. Its position can still be seen today. And now the things we talked about at the beginning come back again. 2,300 miles of isolation, around 900 Moai, changing accuracy from 0.3 degrees to 2.8 degrees, the drought around 1550, 30 carving zones, and 11 possible convergence points. Perhaps this is the biggest mystery of the story. We can see what they built. But why they built all of these things together is the question that still remains. So, in the end, the question is no longer how the people of Rapanui managed to build such huge statues. The real question is what their purpose was behind all these things. And here, it is also important to understand the role of AI correctly. AI did not suddenly read some magical message hidden inside the stones. The real work was to look at thousands of measurements, GPS coordinates, scans, and different data sets together, and search for patterns that humans might not have been able to connect while looking at them separately. Because the data was not new. The Ahu alignments already existed. The coordinates had already been recorded. The stone structures were already in front of us. The Rongo-Rongo symbols were also already there. The roads were also there. Later, old climate records brought another picture into the story. But the problem was that all these pieces were lying in different places. When people tried to look at them together, a different possibility appeared. Perhaps all these things were not completely separate from each other. Maybe the biggest mystery is not what the people of Rapanui built. The biggest mystery is why and how they preserved so much knowledge in a place where they must have known that one day future generations might forget what it meant. They did not leave the memory of their civilization only in their stories. They also left it in stones, directions, roads, and structures that we can still see and measure today. Time changed. The drought came. Society changed. Some links of knowledge were broken, but the stone remained there. Perhaps that is why, even 300 years later, we are still standing in front of it and asking questions. Those statues had not been silent for 3 centuries. We were simply asking them the wrong questions. And perhaps now, for the first time, we have started looking in the right direction.